Okay, so we're diving into the Tower of London today.
A place
That's a good one.
practically overflowing with history and hauntings.
Yeah.
And, of course,
At the heart of it all.
is the unforgettable Anne Boleyn.
Right. And when you say overflowing,
I mean, the tower's not just some historical landmark.
it's more like a crucible.
Yeah, a crucible of human drama.
Totally.
I mean, centuries of it.
You've got
Kings, queens, prisoners.
executions, you name it.
And every stone, it feels like, has a story to tell.
It's all there, etched into the walls.
Well, you sent over this really interesting podcast, Mystery Stories for Sleep.
Oh, yeah.
And they did a whole episode on Anne Boleyn,
Mhm.
haunting the tower specifically.
Right.
And it got me thinking,
Out of all the stories, all the figures associated with this place,
why does hers resonate so much?
well, it's more than just ghosts, isn't it?
I mean, her life was dramatic.
Entangled with.
Huge shifts in power, the church, the monarchy, Henry VIII's ambitions.
Right.
It's a recipe for legend, even without the ghost stories.
Exactly. And the podcast definitely leans into the spooky side.
But they talk about Anne wandering the tower
Oh, yeah.
with her severed head.
It's terrifying stuff.
It's a classic image.
It is. But before we get too caught up in the ghostly tales,
Maybe we should step back a bit,
Sure.
get some historical grounding.
I think that's always a good place to start.
I mean, to really get why Anne's story still has this hold.
We need to understand the world she was living in, you know?
Okay, yeah, paint the picture for us.
So imagine England,
On the verge of this huge religious upheaval.
Henry VIII, desperate for a son, a male heir.
And he's clashing with the most powerful institution.
At that time, the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So what does he do?
He divorces Catherine of Aragon.
And marries Anne.
Wow.
It sent shockwaves, across Europe.
And we're talking about the 1500s here, right?
This is the 16th century.
So this isn't some small thing.
No, this is high-stakes drama.
High stakes?
Yeah, and Anne's right in the thick of it.
It does feel like a real-life drama, like a soap opera.
But with, actual crowns and executions.
Exactly.
And the podcast really painted her as this...
I don't know, like magnetic, ambitious figure
Yeah.
navigating this incredibly complex court.
And ambitious, for sure.
But we shouldn't forget her support for the Reformation.
It wasn't just about love for Henry.
This was a calculated move.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, here she is.
A chance to reshape England's entire religious landscape.
And she goes for it.
Absolutely. She grabs it with both hands.
Which I think is what makes her downfall.
So tragic,
Yeah.
The podcast really emphasizes that contrast.
Going from, like, the most powerful woman in England.
To accused traitor.
Yeah.
In just a few short years.
It's a steep, steep fall from grace.
And we should probably be upfront here.
Go on.
Those accusations, the treason, adultery, even incest.
Right.
Most historians today.
I think those were completely fabricated.
Oh, yeah. They were baseless.
To solidify his own power, basically.
I was political maneuvering, pure and simple.
Right.
Henry needed Anne gone.
To secure his legacy, to get that male heir.
It's a brutal reminder, though.
Of how quickly things could change.
Especially back then.
Back then.
And especially for women.
Who dared to
I don't know.
to challenge the status quo.
To step out of line even a little.
To rise too high, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So even without the ghost stories,
And stories.
it's already got everything. Ambition, love, betrayal, tragedy.
It's all there.
And that, my friend, is fertile ground for a ghost story.
One that just won't die.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like with each retelling, each whisper of her name.
The story gets, I don't know, more elaborate.
Right, like a game of telephone.
Yeah, exactly.
Adding a little more intrigue.
A little more ghost story.
Exactly.
With the podcast.
It really dives headfirst into those ghost stories.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they go all in on Anne still roaming the tower.
Still carrying her severed head.
A haunting image, for sure. It's such a vivid image.
And they don't stop there.
They also mention sightings.
At Hever Castle.
Right, her childhood home.
And even Blickling Hall, where supposedly she was born.
Which adds this whole other layer, right?
Because these places, they're not just random locations, they're infused with her memory. These places become almost a stage
Yeah.
for us to, like, project our fascination onto.
It's like if those walls could talk.
But with a ghostly twist.
Right. And speaking of chills, we can't forget about...
The tower's other, let's say, permanent residents.
Oh, you mean the ones who never really left?
Exactly.
In the podcast, they spend a good amount of time.
On the Princes in the Tower.
Ah, Yes, the princess.
Talk about a story shrouded in mystery.
More layers than even Anne's story, I'd argue.
Right. 2 young boys,
Locked away.
their fate still unknown.
It really makes you think about
The power dynamics at play
and the lengths people would go to.
secure their own position.
The podcast even mentioned these, like
Whispers of them appearing as these
2 small figures dressed in white,
holding hands, right?
holding hands. Yeah. Well,
Tugs at the heartstrings, doesn't it?
it's like if that doesn't get to you,
Then I don't know what will.
it taps into that fear, I think, that universal fear.
Of lost innocence?
Yes, and of justice, you know?
Like, was justice ever served?
And the tower, it's like it holds its secrets tight,
Oh, it does.
doesn't give them up easily.
Which just makes those stories,
Well, haunting.
it adds to the mystery, to the allure.
And it's not just them, right?
No, the tower's seen its fair share of tragedy.
Lady Jane Grey.
Ugh. Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen.
Another figure caught in that
That Tudor web of intrigue.
and executed so young.
16 years old.
It's heartbreaking.
It really highlights the brutality of the time.
That just, like, the power of those in charge.
The fickle nature of power, for sure.
And it makes you wonder, right?
About what could have been.
About the lives cut short, the stories untold.
The what-ifs of history.
And then there's Sir Walter Raleigh.
Ah, Raleigh. A true Renaissance man.
Explorer, writer, scholar.
And yet, imprisoned in the tower.
For 13 years.
Before eventually meeting his end.
Which I think reminds us that,
It wasn't just royalty who were imprisoned there.
no, the tower's reach extended far and wide.
Anyone deemed a threat, potential rival.
Even the most brilliant minds weren't safe.
It's a sobering thought.
A reminder of the fragility of power, of freedom.
And that even the brightest lights can be extinguished.
In the blink of an eye.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
About.
Well, it's like the tower.
It's almost like a mirror, you know, to our own, I don't know.
Anxieties, maybe. About power, about fate.
Right.
The uncertainty of it all.
The fact that
Life and death could all change so fast.
it could all be decided on a whim.
Exactly. Which brings us back to that question
The podcast posed at the end.
about why we're drawn to these stories.
Yes. Why are we so fascinated?
By ghost stories, especially in places like the tower.
It's more than just wanting to be spooked, right?
Right?
I think it's about tapping into something deeper.
Okay, yeah. What do you mean?
These stories, whether they're true or not,
They let us confront these huge...
fears we have about death, about what comes after.
It's like staring into the abyss.
In a way, yeah.
But safely, you know?
It's a controlled dose of fear.
Exactly.
And I think there's also this element of
Wanting to connect, to reach back through time.
to those who came before.
Yes, exactly.
Like, figures like Anne Boleyn,
Or even the princes in the tower.
they stop being just names in a history book.
They come alive.
Yes, and we feel for them.
We empathize with their plight.
We want justice for them even now.
Exactly, and I think that's a key part of it.
These stories, they help us process tragedy.
Find meaning in it, maybe.
Yeah, and to remember that even in the face of darkness,
The human spirit, it endures.
and the tower itself, it's like
This constant imposing
a
presence.
silent witness to it all.
For centuries it stood there.
Absorbing it all. The good, the bad.
You can practically feel the weight of it. You know?
absolutely.
Like it's vibrating with stories, whispers of the past.
And maybe that's why some stories, some lives,
They just refuse to fade away.
they stick with us.
Haunting us, reminding us.
That we're not alone in our fascination with the past.
And that's a pretty powerful thing to consider, don't you think?
Absolutely. It makes you think, if these walls could talk,
What stories would they tell?
and maybe more importantly, what will our stories be?
What will we leave behind for others to uncover?
It's something to think about, for sure.
Indeed it is.